Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. Unfortunately, I'm flying solo today, so I'm your host, Director Kevin Hughes of Freed Indeed Ministries. Um, I was hoping Cheryl would be able to join us today because we're going to be covering a topic um, close to and central to, well, not central to, but in the orbit of biblical counseling. But Nevertheless, today we're covering a topic that was asked of us by a viewer just like you. So if you have questions like this, please either email them to info@freedindeedmin.org. That's info at freedindeedmin.org. Info@freedindeedmin.org, or post them to our Facebook discussion group, Living Freed. That's Living Freed on Facebook. You can also, if you have a question about the paranormal, you can post it to Christians Who Love the Paranormal Facebook group. Um, and obviously, any questions you have, you can direct message them to me on Facebook, Instagram, or at the aforementioned email. Um, so, uh, Before we get too far into it, our sponsors for this episode are God the Father Apparel. You can see I'm wearing one of their awesome hoodies today. And in addition to God the Father Apparel, I want to remind everyone to check out Queen of Peace Bookstore. Um, Link in the description below. That is actually the bookstore that we own. So you can especially purchase Orthodox books there because I'm trying to help bring in more of an Orthodox identity to the store. But also, do check out, we have lots of great Catholic books as well. For example, our most recent featured book has been The Case for Patriarchy, which I'm going to be discussing a little bit more later, but it's an awesome book. Truly great. So, really excited about all of that. Now, into our episode. So, the first question that we got was, um, and I'm gonna actually put in just a little warning here. These questions are about sexual ethics, so we want to just give that warning. Um, if you have small children, parental advisory notice. I want to try to cover this in such a way um, that makes it approachable and makes it maybe even valuable for discussion with your kiddos. Um, but I understand, and I don't want to be shocking to anybody. If your kids aren't ready for that sort of thing, then watch something else right now. But today's questions. So one question is from a young lady who is converting to Orthodoxy. I don't know what she's converting from, but welcome to the church. And we're really excited to hear about that. So many people are converting to Orthodoxy right now, and every single one of them, it's super exciting to see. But her question um, is what is the Orthodox Church's teaching on masturbation? Is masturbation a sin? Um, so this comes from, now, in most traditions, self self s- self sexual stimulation is considered a sin. That across the board, most traditions would consider that to be a sin. However, um, in particularly within the evangelical Protestant world, and especially within charismatic circles. There has been, in the last decade or so, there has been an argument floating around um, that I've seen presented by a lot of lay Christians. It is not presented by um, people who are higher up in the church, people who are scholars, that sort of thing. Typically, this is just a ground level argument. Anybody who really thinks about the issues here tends not to use this. But as we've said before on this show, it's important to address things that are in that grassroots level thing, because essentially that's where most people are. Most people are not scholars. So, it's important to address the things that scholars are dealing with, but it's also important to address things that the laity are dealing with. The so in this particular issue, what I've seen said by many within the sort of evangelical community and the broader evangelical orbit, like charismatics, is that since Jesus says that it's a sin to lust, therefore, if you somehow were to masturbate without lusting, um, that wouldn't be a sin. So that's the argument as presented. Now, this is false. Throughout church history, it has always been seen as sinful to um, practice any kind of selfish um, sexuality. Grace and peace to you as well, Colin. Thank you for joining the show. So, I want to talk about this a little bit, though, because here's the thing. Um, I want to start by recommending two books. One is The Exemplary Husband by um, Stuart Scott, Dr. Stuart Scott, which is an awesome book, but he has a chapter on sexuality. And in that chapter, he discusses something very interesting. He discusses the fact that sexuality should never be a selfish act. If you are if you are having sex selfishly, then you are sinning. So the reason why I bring that up is simply this. Even if you are with your wife and there's nothing inherently sinful about the union of a husband and wife sexually. So even if you are having that sexual union with your wife, but say you're thinking about another woman, or say you're just thinking about yourself and your own desires, then you are sinning. And I don't see the difference. Well, I do, but I'll I don't see how that cannot be applied to the topic at hand. If someone um is masturbating, and it's, even if they're supposedly not turned on by anything, just the act of utilizing your sexuality for selfish ends is not the way God intended human sexuality to function. And any time we utilize human sexuality for something other than God's intended use, we are sinning. So, this is why, homosexuality is a sin, because homosexuality is not God's intended use of human sexuality. So, anytime we are utilizing human sexuality outside of the bounds that God has revealed to be um, not just permissible, but according to his design, we are in sin. The other book I want to recommend is the aforementioned Case for Patriarchy, which is one of My favorite books that came out this year being 2021 still, this book came out this year and it is awesome. And we do have it at Queen of Peace bookstore, so check that out. If you go to the bookstore's website, look up Patriarchy, you will find this book. It is an excellent book. I highly recommend it. And the reason why I bring it up now is because one of the things that Timothy Gordon talks about is that the only way for us to defeat feminism is with what he calls weaponized chastity. Now, feminism is the heresy of our day. It is the Arianism of our day because feminism has essentially, just as Arianism did in its time, so feminism has taken over the popular culture. All of the people who make movies, all of the people who run your news shows, all of the people who are speaking into the culture by and large are feminists. So that means that this is where Christians have the most difficult battle to fight is on the issue of feminism. And the only way we can win that battle is through this weaponized chastity. Well, weaponized chastity, now chastity does not mean that you never have sex. Chastity means that you never have illicit sex. So that means you would always be utilizing your human sexuality for the ends which God has created it. You would not be using it for selfish purposes. You would not be using it for homosexual purposes or autoerotic purposes or um, or even for premarital sex. And one of the reasons why this is such an issue is because, as Timothy Gordon points out, if the say you're in a Christian courtship and the young man is guarding the virtue of the courtship, he's doing his God ordained task of leading his future spouse. Now, this doesn't mean they can't flirt and do these things. In fact, that's encouraged. But all of this excitement of the passions diffuses at the end of the night when he drops her off and heads home himself. And then all of this crescendos into a beautiful first night after their wedding, when they can actually act on these passions that they've been building over time. Um, this is the Christian ideal. But if the prospective husband starts making sexual advances, then he has now placed his fiance, his courtier, um, in the station of having to guard the virtue of the relationship, which means that he has ceded his authority over the relationship and given it to her, which this is actually why in the 1960s the feminist movement weaponized unchastity. The feminist movement weaponized um, illicit human sexuality because their purpose was to flip the roles of man and woman. And it's been largely successful. The only way that we can defeat them is by weaponized chastity, and this will right the wrong because it will cause men to act as men and be chaste and be leading their prospective wives, which will then prepare them to lead their actual wives. So, young ladies, if somebody is making sexual advancements at you, leave that relationship immediately. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. That is not a man who can lead you. And young men, don't do that. Um, don't make sexual advances before marriage and be ready for the married life. And then human sexuality, we also you should be having sex once you're married and lots of it. Um, that's also part of the the married life should be sexy and the unmarried life should not. So that's just something from that book that I think is helpful here. Now, one of the problems with unchastity, and masturbation is a form of unchastity, is not only um, that it removes your authority in that sense, because I realize that someone is going to say, okay, well, if I'm by myself, nobody knows what I'm doing. I'm not losing my authority. So, by your own argument, that part at least isn't an issue. But the problem is that you are still partaking of this selfishness and you are still acting in a manner that gives up control, gives up self control, self discipline, and places yourself on a level below. Um, and what that does then is it changes you. All of our behaviors change us. So if you're partaking of autoerotic activities, then you're going to be causing yourself to be less disciplined, less controlled, less capable of being the leader you're called to be in your marriage, less capable of being the chaste man you're called to be, even if you're not married. And if you're not married, then you're called to celibacy before marriage. Thank you, Colin. And so this is a deep issue, deep-seated issue, and I think that, you know, I understand why people are asking the question, because the Christian life is, well, it's a straight and narrow road. It's not the broad road. It's not the easy road. It's the straight and narrow road. And I understand that. But here's the thing. Um, we need to be we need to follow Jesus. And Jesus said that if you even look upon a woman to lust after her, you have already committed fornication in your heart. So, Jesus' standard for sexual ethic is to go above and beyond the Old Testament call of duty. Jesus' standard for sexual ethic is one of total weaponized chastity. And even before feminism, weaponized chastity was imperative, because it was through weaponized chastity that Jesus wanted us to defeat the strongholds of sin and to defeat the devil. There are very few things more powerful than the human sex drive, and there are very few things more powerful than overcoming that human sex drive and living a life of chastity, which is what Christ has called us to. And I know it's not easy, but one of the implications of that is that autoerotic activities are in fact a sin and are in fact unwise and do not help you in the pursuit of virtue. So, all of those things need to be cast aside. Um, One last point that I'll make is that even many non Christians have come to the conclusion that autoerotic activities need to be ceased. I follow a board that is heavily discusses philosophy, and one of the philosophers on that board is very into the ancient Greek philosophers in particular, and he talked about the fact that um, what he read some studies that showed how pornography affects the brain, And after reading these studies, he determined that he was going to quit pornography, so he did, and he has been off of pornography for over a year. And then he decided that having quit pornography, he was going to quit autoerotic activities as well. And so he has, and he has been pursuing this goal for several months now. Um, and he was talking about the changes and the benefits that he's seen just from this. And it's interesting that here's someone who does not believe Christian truth, and yet even just his sort of Platonism and Stoic philosophy calls him to a way of life that is higher than many people want to live for Jesus. So I guess where I want to admonish you on that is, if pagans can receive such benefits from what is ours by right, then ought we not to take hold of what is our own and utilize it to receive supernatural virtues? The pagans can only receive natural virtues, we can receive supernatural virtues, and ought we not to do just that? And furthermore, if a pagan can see the self destruction caused by autoerotic activities and flees from it, then ought not we who have the holy gospel and who know that we are in the image of God and who have received the grace of God through baptism, ought we not to flee from youthful lusts and to put on the full armor of God and battle against these things? So, I do want to give that word of encouragement there. And I also want to say that, I totally understand if you're struggling. I totally understand that that this is a difficult struggle, and because it's not easy, we have to stick together. So um if you need to contact info@freedomdeedman.org for help or resources or anything, feel free to do so. If you want to reach out on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, feel free to do so. And if you want to reach out in the comments, feel free to do so. But you don't have to go through this alone. You can, there is help. And the most important thing is, go to your local church. Go to your local parish priest, and seek help that way as well, because you shouldn't go through this alone. We all need help from time to time. We all struggle against our sinful nature and our sinful passions. And in this instance in particular, this is something that we're going to struggle with a lot, and we need the help of the church. So, by all means, you can feel free to reach out to me, but even if you do so, I'm going to point you to your local church as well. So, for sure, make sure you're reaching out to your local church. And there are some great, if you need, um, if you need help, there are some great things out there. Covenant Eyes is a useful accountability software. Cold Turkey Blocker is really awesome, because it actually prevents you from going to things. And Cold Turkey Blocker is actually free, and you can put in as many websites as you need to. You can block everything pornographic. You can block everything that has certain taglines. It's really super great and super helpful, and I highly recommend it. And there's all kinds of other things that I'm sure you can find that I don't even know about. So definitely, there's lots of help out there, and you don't have to go through it alone. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, especially Colin. Um, and by the way, just we really love Colin the Ambassador. He has a show dealing with Seventh day Adventism. Um, awesome guy, an awesome show, and does great work. So keep up the good work, Colin. He's fighting the good fight against um, the wickedness and deceptions of this age and of the cult of Ellen. So for sure, much love and God bless everybody. Make sure to share this with your friends so that they too can be freed indeed.